Manish, I want to talk more about the Jets ownership group. You obviously covered Woody. You covered Chris Johnson when Woody was the ambassador for the Trump administration in the UK. In your time covering the Jets, what are the biggest ownership issues that the Jets have to deal with? Jet fans, we are the ones who deal with it. In your opinion, and from your reporting, talking with people, why have the Johnson brothers been unable to consistently put together a good football team?
I think ultimately it starts with relationships around the league. As odd as it may sound, even though Woody has owned the team for a generation, he does not have good relationships around the league, good connections with people. And I think that's evidenced by the fact that the Jets have brought in outside consultants for a number of different hires. They hired a consulting firm when they were looking for a general manager that ultimately landed John Idzik. They hired two consultants in Ron Wolf and Charlie Casserly when they hired Mike McCagnon and Todd Bowles. And then most recently, they hired an outside consultant, somebody that Woody obviously knows very well, in former Jets general manager Mike Tannenbaum, when bringing in Aaron Glenn. You only need to bring in consultants when you can't effectively bring in quality candidates yourself based on the relationships and connections that you have. And neither Woody Johnson nor Chris Johnson has those relationships. And I think it starts from that. Internally, the structure is completely flawed. Internally, Woody does not know much about football. Christopher Johnson does not know much about football. They have their top advisor, a man named Ira Axelrod, who's not technically employed by the New York Jets, having a lot of influence in big picture decisions in the organization. So just as a thumbnail sketch, Ira Axelrod was the former legal counsel for the Johnson Company, which is a private equity group. It's not Johnson & Johnson. I think some fans believe that Woody Johnson has some kind of connection to the Johnson & Johnson family. I mean, while he is a Johnson, his father wasn't even really involved in the Johnson & Johnson Company. So Woody's fortune, yes, from a trickle-down effect, comes from the Johnson & Johnson Company, but Woody has no affiliation. Christopher Johnson has no affiliation with the Johnson & Johnson Company. What they do own is the Johnson Company Corporation, which is a private equity firm in which Ira Axelrod was a longtime legal counsel. I think he has since been promoted to president. I don't remember exactly what his title is, but he is not an employee of the Jets. So if you go on any Jets literature and go on their website and look at their hierarchy, his name's not going to be mentioned anywhere in there, but he is the Johnson brothers' top advisor. He's also the person who controls the purse strings, the financial purse strings for coaches' contracts, for general manager contracts, any big money free agent signings, and even free agent signings who are relatively cheap. But if it's beyond the scope of the budget, it has to be cleared with Woody and Christopher Johnson, who clear it with Ira Axelrod. They trust him so much that he's got that kind of voice. I mean, Ira, for example, has been in on general manager interviews, and I've spoken to previous general manager candidates. Some who have said that Axelrod doesn't actually ask any questions; he just kind of sits there, which was odd to some people. And then some candidates who have told me that he actually participates and asks a question here and there, and some really odd questions that aren't typical for general manager interviews. But when you look at contracts, Aaron Glenn, I believe, has a 5-year deal that was negotiated by Ira Axelrod. The Jets have a separate cap guy, Nick Sabella, who deals with free agent players, but he does not deal with the general manager and the head coach contract. So Aaron Glenn's contract, Darren Muji's contract, that's all negotiated through Ira Axelrod. So he has a lot of pull, a lot of say. Now, he's not going in and saying, hey, we need to draft this guy or we need to sign this guy. That's not his role. But he does have say in the big picture financial decisions, which is, I think, highly flawed. I'll give you an example. Darren Muji's predecessor, Joe Douglas, the Jets fired Mike Maccagnan after the draft. They essentially picked Joe Douglas because that is who Adam Gase wanted. Now, Christopher Johnson was in charge. Christopher Johnson had no idea who Joe Douglas was. That was an Adam Gase hire because Gase and Douglas worked together in Chicago. The initial offer that Douglas got from Ira was about $1.9 million a year in a multi-year deal. But I got to give Joe Douglas's agent, Jimmy Sexton, who represents a lot of coaches and players. He's actually Aaron Glenn's agent as well. Sexton was in a favorable position, and he leveraged that position to turn a initial offer of $1.9 million over several years to a $20 million guaranteed contract for Joe Douglas, making him one of the top 5 GMs, top 5 paid GMs at the time. And that was all a mistake by Ira Axelrod. He's the one who initially, signed off on it. He gets the blessing from the Johnsons, but by and large, the Johnsons lean on Ira for these types of decisions because he's much more well-versed in it, which makes sense. But the fact that he is involved to this degree is dysfunctional in my estimation, based on people that I've talked to who have worked for the Jets in high-level positions. The other element to this is their team president is Jaime Elhai. For the longest time, he was also, I believe, legal counsel for the Jets, dealing only essentially on the business side of the organization. Now, it's only been maybe about 5 years or so where Jaime has had more of a say in football matters. So he still has a role on the business side, but he also has a role on the football side, and that does include personnel, players. I don't think that that's a smart structure for a number of different reasons. So I do think that the inner circle of the higher ups in the Jet organization, that's the 2 Johnson brothers, the team president, and their top consultant. I really do think they are the crux of the issue. Unfortunately for Jet fans, that's never going to change unless Woody Johnson, who's the majority owner, sells. And I would not anticipate that happening because he makes a ton of money regardless of what happens on the field. And, barring something off the field, I wouldn't anticipate the Johnsons selling. So I think this structure is going to be in place for the foreseeable future. And that really, again, is the root of the problem. Now, we can talk about they hired the wrong guy, they signed the wrong player. Those are all fun conversations to have, and I think important conversations to have, but ultimately nothing substantial will change unless this power dynamic high in the organization changes, and I don't see that happening.
So what can be done? Because ultimately, when Woody Johnson first bought the team from 2000 to 2016, they never had back-to-back losing seasons. They also obviously made the playoffs 6 times out of Woody's first 10 seasons. The Rex years, they were in the championship game 2 straight years. So we actually have seen some competency with Woody owning the team. Now it's been forever since 15-year playoff drought and counting, but Glenn wasn't fired after a year. Muji is still here. The Jets a year from now, if they don't figure it out, they got the 3 first-round picks and cap space. From the outside looking in, well, it's an attractive job. You have a path maybe to one of the top quarterbacks, but Woody's still going to own the team at that point. So, what can the Jet fan truly hope and point to give us something that it actually could get better and the team won't be bad forever?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. My simple answer is you need a generational player at the quarterback position. I mean, that's really what it is. Woody Johnson, Christopher Johnson, they're not respected among the owners that I talk to. I don't talk to the other 31 owners. I'm not going to profess to that. But there are a handful of owners who I have good relationships with who have repeatedly told me that, the Johnson brothers are not respected. And I think there's a trickle-down effect, just take it one notch lower about players. And people say, well, no one's going to come and play for the Jets. I don't think anyone with options would play for the Jets if the money were comparable. So the Jets have to pay a little bit more, and some players don't have a lot of options. And if they're getting a significant amount more than another team is offering, then they're going to go to the Jets. For coaches, I think it's a much more impactful reality. I see a lot of people recently saying, well, Darren Muji was college roommates with Kevin O'Connell. And if things go south for whatever reason after the 2026 season in Minnesota, that Kevin O'Connell would run to the New York Jets and be the head coach because he's pals with Darren Muji. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because Kevin O'Connell has other options. And if you're a coveted candidate who has other options, you're not going to choose the New York Jets for a number of reasons. And Woody and Christopher Johnson are at the top of that. And that's just a reality. Maybe the coaches don't know. I mean, Kevin has a better idea because he played with the Jets. He understands a little bit of the inner workings of the organization. Not a lot, but a little. But even if you don't know anything about the Jets, every coach is represented by an agent. And the agents know. The agents are fully aware of what organizations are dysfunctional, what organizations that they wouldn't send their coveted head coaching prospect to, and what organizations they would love to go to for a lot of different reasons. So this isn't new. What I'm saying is not new to people in the know across the NFL. So that's why you look at Aaron Glenn. So look, I admittedly have a bias with Aaron Glenn. As we talked about, I've known for a long time. But it's not as if Aaron Glenn was a highly coveted head coach who had 3 or 4 options and he chose the Jets. Glenn's also a little bit of an outlier because he played in New York as a starter and had a lot of success. But I think if you look at a coveted candidate, he's never going to choose the Jets. I don't want to say never, but he's in all likelihood not going to choose the Jets because there's always going to be 1, 2, 3 other choices that make more sense from an ownership standpoint, from a stability standpoint, and frankly, from a reputation standpoint. I think all those things, factor in. So the only thing that could potentially draw one of these highly coveted people to join your team is if you have a dynamic young quarterback. If you've got whoever, Justin Herbert. I know people want to trash on Justin Herbert, but if you have Justin Herbert, if a few years ago, if the Bengals job was open, you would look towards Joe Burrow. A couple years ago, if the Bills job came open, you'd look toward Josh Allen. If you have an unbelievably talented, bright, young prospect at quarterback, that potentially could move the needle. But short of that, it's not realistic. And I understand it's frustrating, I should say, for Jet fans to hear something like that. But just look at who has been the head coach the last 3 or 4 times around. How many of those guys had a lot of options? I would say very few of them.
But it's interesting to me because when they hired Robert Saleh, he was perceived to be the top candidate of that cycle. Bowles was highly regarded coming off a year where he was the assistant coach of the year under Bruce Arians. So, Gase never should have been hired in the first place. We could go down that path if we want. I wanted Mike McCarthy that year. They obviously didn't hire him, but they've had opportunities to do the right thing and they keep getting these hires wrong. I don't think James Dolan with the Knicks just became a good owner. I think he finally hired Leon Rose and Tom Thibodeau. And I don't think the Pagulas are great owners. I think they kind of lucked into it with Josh Allen. They got it right with Bean and McDermott for all those years. So I think it truly comes down to a little luck involved for sure on who they end up hiring. And was Dave Canales taking over a great situation in Carolina? No, the owner Tepper's terrible, but by year 2, they're in the playoffs. So it could be done if you actually get the right people in charge.
Yeah, you're right. It definitely can be done if you hit on the people who can identify the players. Now, what I would say, just digging a little bit deeper, is that the Jets do have a weird dynamic where there's some years where they're just not going to spend money. And I know it's been frustrating for former general managers where they think they're coming in, hitting the ground running, and they're just not allowed to spend. And that's a Jet-specific issue. That's a Jet-specific problem. But I do agree with you completely that
is that Woody or Ira though when that happens? How involved is Axelrod in pulling the spending on Douglas or McCagnon or now Muji?
Yeah,
GMs that want to spend money.
Yeah, he's the number one person that controls all that. So he is the reason.
Axelrod.
Yes, he's the reason. I think that that had been a barrier to former GMs who have told me that and who I knew through other channels. It's a problem. It's a significant problem. Now, can a great general manager who makes great draft picks overcome that? I think they can stem the tide to a certain degree. We haven't seen them overcome that in 15 years. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. But a general manager can only do so much. Now, the general manager doesn't have to worry about money when it comes to draft picks. So that's all on the general manager. That's all on Darren Muji right now. Now, he can make great decisions over the next 2 years and land 5, 6, 7 cornerstone pieces if he knows what he's doing and if he hits on these guys. That's all important. Ultimately, though, finances do play a part in whether a team is successful. How much are you willing to spend? Who are you willing to spend it on? If you just look at the two teams in the Super Bowl, the Patriots and the Seahawks were top 5 in free agent spending. There's this misnomer that if you're spending a lot in free agency, you're probably gonna, not get the dividends. You're probably gonna suck. Well, I can look back, less than 1 year ago, 2 of the top 5 teams that spent the most were in the Super Bowl, and one of them won it. So I do think that's a significant problem, and I have felt the angst and the frustration from Jets general managers through the years, saying that is a significant obstacle for them and a very frustrating challenge for them to overcome.
I believe your last season was the 2020 year, right? So from 2021 to now, are you surprised it has remained this bad? It feels like now it is as worse as it's ever been. And I talk to Jet fans for 4 hours a day on this channel. I can't remember a time worse. So you tell me.
Yeah, it's pretty dark. It's pretty dark. I mean, without getting into too many details, I knew Robert Saleh very well. I've known him since he was a position coach with the Jaguars, which goes back, 15 some odd years. Tough spot for him. I think he made his fair share of mistakes. I hope he learns, frankly, in Tennessee from the mistakes that he made. Much like I talked about hoping that Aaron Glenn learns from his first year. I hope that, Robert Saleh learns from the years that he was with the Jets. And I think he will. I think, coaches second time around typically are better. You saw, Todd Bowles has had much more success in Tampa than he did with the Jets. So, is it dire? I don't know. I think Darren Muji's done a good job. He's been on the job for a short amount of time. I think he's positioned the Jets, at least on paper, to really build something over the next 2 years. I know Jets fans don't want to hear, 2026 is going to be a throwaway year, so get ready for year 16 of missing the playoffs. I know they don't want to hear that. It's frustrating, right? It's annoying, frankly. And there's no guarantee that after this 2-year period with all these draft picks that they're going to be significantly better.
It comes down to quarterback, right? I mean, Douglas, for all his faults, he hit on a lot of first-round picks. They screwed up the Zach Wilson pick as bad as you could screw up a pick, and that they're still paying the consequences for that.
Yeah, look, I think what's annoying for Jet fans, just to circle back on that for a second, is that you had the guy in the building. You could have drafted a perennial Pro Bowl left tackle in Penei Sewell. You could have drafted arguably the best wide receiver in football in Jamar Chase. And, oh, by the way, if you drafted Penei Sewell, you don't know if your draft positioning would have been the same subsequent years. I understand all that, but you did have another opportunity to draft a dynamic superstar wide receiver in JSN. You didn't even have a first-round grade on him. You took Will McDonald. So the opportunities were there for Muji's predecessor to really make some significant differences to help this team, and it didn't happen. So, but that's in the past. You can't go back. If you look at Muji's position now, with the picks this year, the picks next year, there is a real chance, and free agency, by the way, they've got a boatload of space. How much cash they're actually going to spend, ask Ira, who knows, but they have an opportunity here, a 2-year window to really set a foundation that could be beneficial down the road. The X factor, Jake, as I'm sure you have talked about ad nauseum, is Aaron Glenn the right guy to make it happen? Is he? It's a fair question to ask. Do you cut ties with him? What I'll ask you, you know this team better than anybody. They've got 3 wins. Let's say, for argument's sake, they make a leap to 7 wins. That's more than twice as many wins. That's clear progress. But then you're in a position, does that mean that you keep Glenn? Because you're not going to be in position to draft a quarterback high unless you get rid of some of your assets, unless you trade up. And you still don't even know if that's possible because you don't know who's going to be picking first, second, and third. Maybe those are quarterback needy teams that are not going to trade, for you to go up and get a quarterback. So I just think it's a precarious and interesting position as someone on the outside looking in, not as a Jet fan. They've got these picks. They can make strides, but will they make too many strides in 2026 to hamper their long-term growth?
Well, that to me is where coaching matters, right? Because Sean Payton took over a team that had no obvious path to a quarterback. Bo Nix was the fifth guy taken at pick 15, and they're in the AFC Championship in his second year with Nix, third year overall. They made the playoffs when Nix was a rookie. Like, to me, you'll know good coaching when you see it. So if like Adam Gase won 7 games his first year too, they started 1-7 and then beat a bunch of backup quarterbacks to go. You were on the beat then. So like I got to see what it looks like. But if they win 7 games, see you later. I got 3 first-round picks, and I know it might be tough to get a quote-unquote, top-of-the-line coach, but I could find an offensive coach for my young quarterback I'm taking. And, again, you have the 3 picks, and if you have to move up, it's unfortunate, but you need a quarterback. So I think we got to see what it looks like to answer your question. And I do wonder this, because when I was down at the Senior Bowl and I was talking to people even last week in San Fran at Radio Row, people around football, coaching agents, et cetera. You talk about Glenn, it's like disaster, shocked he wasn't fired, all that. You talk to anyone about Darren Muji, though, it's a way different answer. You have contacts all around the league. Is that the sense you get, that Muji is at least thought of in a positive way, where maybe there's a path where he's here and he's a part of a coach search, and if Glenn can't figure it out, Glenn wouldn't be?
Yeah, what I would say is if, for whatever reason, they do move on from Aaron Glenn during the season, after the season, Darren Muji will be part of the hiring process for the next head coach.
You don't think they'd clean house? Like
no, they're not. They're not doing that. I mean, something obviously can change between now and the end of the year. A million variables could happen, but as we stand right now on February 13th, no, that's not their thinking. Their thinking is not to get a new general manager and a new head coach. Their thinking
is it a money thing? Is it because they'd have to pay?
Well, it's part of it. Yeah, I mean, for the coach, for example, you talk to people down the Senior Bowl and they're surprised that Glenn is back. Glenn signed a 5-year deal. Woody Johnson would never pay a head coach 4 years, while he's not the head coach. Ira Axelrod would never sign off on that. I think Woody would agree with that. That's not how they do things. Now, they've gotten trapped in certain instances where they've given guys extensions and they had to fire him. McCagnon's a good example of that with Christopher Johnson. But with 3 years left, if 2026 year 2 is a disaster under Glenn, then they would have to bite the bullet and pay the 3 years off. But paying 4 years off a non-starter, it was a non-starter. It was just not in their thinking. It was never in their thinking. You can say that's flawed thinking, and I think it's fair to say that, but I'm just telling you what their MO is. I mean, that's how they operate. Is money a factor for Muji? I don't think money is a factor as much as moving off the GM and the head coach after 2 years. Now, they did move off a GM after 2 years in John Idzik, but that was a whole different story.
Wouldn't they learn from the McCagnon debacle of not having, and even firing Tannenbaum and retaining Rex, like keep guys on the same timeline potentially? Look, if Muji does a good job, I'm open to it. But I think if you actually want to make your job attractive for the next head coach, my thought process would be, if you're going after a Mike Tomlin or Sean McDermott or Shane Steichen or KOC, whoever, and they're actually interested because you have a path to a quarterback, you have all the cap space, which they would have again next year. Like, to me, if that guy could bring in his personnel guy he wants to work with, there's like a way to basically make the job more attractive. That's what a Tomlin wants, instead of Muji having to stick around.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It really depends on the personality of the coach or the big fish in this particular case, what his thought process is. I mean, I just have to look at the other team that plays in that stadium, and John Harbaugh has a lot of gravitas, and he was perfectly fine working with Joe Schoen. So he, quote unquote, inherited Joe Schoen. I think typically, Jake, it doesn't work when you're looking for a GM who has to inherit a coach, because that to me is a little bit backwards. It's not really unorthodox for the GM to be in place. If you're a head coach who has a lot of gravitas, however, as you said, maybe they do want to bring in their own personnel guy. And if that's the case, I would be surprised. I mean, maybe Mike Tomlin, but Mike Tomlin, honestly, the guy that Mike Tomlin was always going to hire if he went somewhere else is Omar Khan, and he's already got a job as a general manager. So I'm not sure Tomlin has anyone that fits that parameter. I don't frankly think that Sean McDermott rises to the level where he can command all of that power. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe he does. But those guys are few and far between.
This ownership group let Gase have all this power. They gave Aaron Glenn all this power, and he's not qualified. So they do dumb things.
Yeah, the Gase thing is also a weird time because Woody wasn't. I mean, he was kept abreast, obviously, of what was going on, but he wasn't involved in day-to-day operations. It was more a Christopher Johnson decision that Woody signed off on, more than anything else. Aaron Glenn, I'm not sure Aaron Glenn has that much more power than a typical head coach would have.
Well, I bring that up only because at his introductory press conference, Woody Johnson referred to Muji as Glenn's sidekick. And we've been told any big decision, Aaron Glenn is going to have the final sign-off on it.
Yeah, this is what I'll say about Woody. Again, Woody is not the best public speaker. Woody says, as you know, a lot of odd, quirky things.
Thinking is overrated.
Does he? I was unaware.
There you go. That's perfect, right? Thinking is overrated. Yeah, I mean, Woody is an interesting guy. He's just a very, very interesting guy. I talked about Santonio Holmes being unlike anyone I've ever met. I think Woody probably falls into that category as well. Probably not the best choice of words when describing Darren Muji. But again, barring something odd over the rest of this year, if they did move on from Glenn, they would not move on from Muji. I mean, every indication that I've gotten is that that's not going to be the case.
Interesting.